This is the Balance Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma of managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christie Derrico. At the Balance Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balance stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Just imagine if you could reallocate all of the domestic chores that are part and parcel of adulthood and family life so that everyone's time matters the same amount. And what if that could improve your life and your relationship? Well, our guest, Emily Hay, did just that using the Fair Play methodology developed by Eve Rodsky. And she allowed herself and her husband to be featured in the new Fair Play documentary. We're going to hear about Emily's balance dilemma, her experience with Fair Play, how it's working now, and why she believes in work-life integration rather than balance. Emily is the founder of Hey There Social Media, which trains mothers to run their own social media marketing businesses, and she's very committed to the idea of flexibility. Welcome to the Balance Dilemma, Emily. We are so excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Maura. That's the most beautiful intro I could ever ask for.
All true, all true.
We'd like to start at the beginning, as we usually do, with your personal story. You know, how you grew up, did your both parents work, your education and career aspirations?
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm happy to jump in. I grew up with two working parents. I definitely credit my mom, being in corporate America as someone who, helped me develop a work ethic. Yes, there may have been times when I was a little bit bitter that she was providing Oreos instead of homemade cookies for the bake sales. But I really do believe that it did make me a stronger person. And another thing about that I've observed as an adult now, looking back at how I was raised, we definitely had an imbalance of the invisible labor in our home. It was, not to get ahead, it was through the Fair Play journey that I did a lot of this self-reflection and realized that I was following the same patterns that I had been exposed to in my own home with regards to my mom handling everything.
Were you expected to pursue education and a career?
Yes, I was expected to pursue education and a career. And one thing I'll also credit my mom with is that my mom did not go to college, and she spent her career as what we'd say today is an executive assistant. But, she spent her career calling herself a secretary. So my mom was really savvy at watching her bosses, mostly male, and seeing where they guided their children, what internships, who they should talk to, what career paths were good for them. So my mom was really good at advising me from what she'd overhear from her bosses. So college was always in the plan that my parents had for me.
What plan did you have for you?
Well, I grew up with a real entrepreneurial spirit. Again, I'm reflecting back and finding tendencies and childhood memories that stand out to me. And I really do feel like, I was inspired to come up with opportunity. Everyone talks about when they were a kid and they ran their lemonade stand. Well, I never got excited by lemonade stands because I just felt like they were too cookie cutter. And I'll never forget the first business that I started was in my driveway where we were making friendship bracelets and face painting and selling juice boxes. And basically it was like a whole little mini mall situation. And the reason why that's significant to me is I had a plan that other friends could then follow and start their business. So it wasn't necessarily the cookie cutter lemonade stand. I was really excited to be able to add my own flair and creativity and create a repeatable model.
Emily, now you and I have a connection. My first business was in making barrettes with the colored ribbon tails. And I thought I was all that until my dad made me do a balance sheet and show me profit and loss because I thought I was just going to sell them for 50 cents until I saw my material cost way more than that. But going to this entrepreneurial spirit, where did it come from? Did you have any family members or people that were, models to you that gave you this idea?
Sure. Oh my gosh, I love that story. I wish my dad would have made me do a P&L sheet, but that's great, Christie. So I I would say my spirit came from my mom is a very creative person. She creative and visually, she loved to decorate. She's definitely an ideas person, not to slight her here, but execution is an area that I never really saw her fulfill. And maybe now, as an adult looking back, there may just not have been opportunities or pathways for her to be able to execute on certain ideas. So it was always very fun and celebrated in our house to come up with ideas. So I would give my mom the credit on encouraging, come up with the idea. But as I mentioned about, the first business and even what I do today, I just have a thing for systems. Invent the wheel once, but you don't need to reinvent it.
So you went to college and you went into corporate America. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so someone gave me the advice, if you are going to do something in business someday, start with learning how to sell something. So I'm a proud graduate of The Ohio State University, and I studied marketing, and right out of college, I followed that advice. So I started selling memberships at a country club. That was a nice way to dip my toe into a soft, almost experience type sale. And then I remember hearing, a really great way to work is if you go into copier sales. So my experience in corporate America was working for a Fortune 500 company as a sales rep, selling copiers. Early 20s, I'm laughing at myself, thinking about my suits and my laptop bag and going through office buildings and talking about copier sales and copier leases. But it was truly the best sales boot camp I could have ever asked for.
They say that sales is where to start because you get experience with rejection and you get a thicker skin. And it was either that or you could be a Bible salesperson knocking on doors. There's a lot of rejection with that too. So let me ask you a question. In this business background, did you always want to be a parent?
I did. I really, really did. When I think back to earliest memories, what did I gravitate towards as a child? I was babysitting before I could drive, helping out neighbors with their kids, taking babysitting clinics, thinking about how I could put my little flyers together and make money as a babysitter. So I have always loved children. And I've always pictured myself as the mom, thinking, okay, well, someday this is what I will do. And I guess subconsciously, a lot of my babysitting jobs were for working families. So that was ingrained in me, too, that you need a babysitter when you're out doing whatever fulfills you professionally.
Well, I'm going to take a leap of faith here, but I bet they did not teach a class at Ohio State telling you how to merge that goal of being a parent with your career plans. How did that pan out for you to merge those two desires that you obviously had?
Sure. Gosh, you're right about that. Probably not on the diploma there. With my plans as an adult mom, being a professional, I really knew that I wanted to do both, and I wanted to do both really well. And so that, as I just told my copier, office sales story, that was where I realized this current model that I'm exposed to, as a 20-something professional, isn't going to allow me to have the mom life that I envisioned. So it really lit that fire for me to figure out something else. And I know a lot of people think, okay, well, jump jobs or, figure out maybe a flexible career. But the only thing I could think of was now is a good time to figure out self-employment because that would be flexible. So that's at least what sent me down that path.
So did you ever at any point in time look at the way your mom did it and say, okay, there's aspects that she did that I really, when you say you jumped into the idea of maybe self-employment, mompreneurism, as we've coined it, did you look at your mom's model and say, I can do it better?
Definitely. And when I think of one of the most obvious emotions my mom exposed us to was mom guilt. I mean, I knew she felt guilty for not being able to be at all the ballet recitals or practices, dance classes, bake sales, anything like that fell within the 9 to 5 that she was required to be physically at an office. And we knew that there were things we missed out on. We didn't have our mom at the bus stop. And as a child, it's very easy to see like, oh, well, my mom is doing it wrong. So again, now that I'm a parent and I see like, well, that wasn't her intention, that drove me to, like you had just said, come up with a way to do it, in my mind, better.
We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. This is The Balanced Dilemma. You're listening to The Balance Dilemma. We're speaking with Emily Hay. Emily, before the break, you told us that you had in your mind becoming an entrepreneur. Was that something you started before you had children, or was it after?
Yeah, so I was very motivated to start my own business before I had children. It was just something that I viewed was what I would need in order to have that mom and work balance that I really envisioned. So I definitely went down the entrepreneur's path before I had children, probably 5 full years before I had children.
And that was your own social media business, which is different than what you do now, right?
Yes. My first steps into self-employment took a couple of turns, but at least freelancing. Freelancing was my vehicle to be able to, leave the corporate environment and be able to bring in an income for myself, albeit with all the challenges that freelance life brings. It was my way to, when I saw social media coming online, it was my way to really package some services. In other words, like all these businesses were asking what's social media and how can we use it? So then I tried to find the opportunity where I could come in and say, well, here's some of the activities you need to be doing, like posting on a Facebook page, like starting a YouTube channel.
All the things that we
services.
find challenging in running our little podcast. But I have a question. So
Sure.
Your mom got a lot of mom guilt for not bringing in the cookies, not being there at the bus stop. Was your vision of self-employment coupled with motherhood to do all those things, to be the perfect mom that you did not see in your mom?
Oh, wow, that's a fun one. So I guess the vision I had was being at the bus stop because I had arranged my day in an empowering way that, of course, I can make it to the bus stop. I might need to hop on another call later after, I bring the kids home and give them their snack, but I was able to call the shots of timing is what really, motivated me.
And we're going to get into all the little nuances that you discovered in merging these two things. But let me ask you one other thing. So you had your maternity leave for 2 children while you were self-employed, right?
Absolutely.
How did that work? You did not have a company paying you a salary while you were pregnant and after you had the baby. How did you manage that?
So first and foremost, I'm so grateful that I was able to make that happen. I don't think you need to necessarily have a certain number of years under your belt as a freelancer or just as a self-employed person in order to have, your children while you're self-employed. But for me, it worked out really well. And I'll say I was grossly underprepared for motherhood with my first child and with work. In other words, I mentioned the babysitting experience growing up. I pictured sleepless nights, but I had no idea how demanding the daytime work is as a mom. So I remember having a pretty massive shakeup with my business with my first child because I thought I would be working while she's napping. I thought that laundry would just get done when it used to get done. So that was a real struggle, but got through that one. And then I would just say with my second child, I had much more realistic expectations around, not overscheduling myself and not having too full of a client load. And the flip side to all of it was, certainly income would ebb and flow based on what I was able to take on and manage. But I was lucky to have a really great team. All my team, they were all still working while I was on my air quote maternity time.
Now, did you ever have a moment where you said, I just can't do this and thought about closing your business or doing something different?
I can't say I had a moment of thinking I'd close or even do something different. Just maybe look, this is working. I just need to shift my own expectation. And that, again, it's so marked in my memory of with the second child of just knowing how rough it was with the first. And that way I, give yourself the proverbial grace. I was just in a different headspace when I had my second child, that I hadn't loaded the books with all this client work and all these expectations of things flowing as they should, like I did with my first. So, no, I really didn't have a moment of feeling like I need to close up shop. About 9 years into being an entrepreneur is when I really felt the need to pivot, but perhaps we'll be chatting about that soon.
So, given your commitment to flexibility, though, is it fair to say that the flexibility alone wasn't enough, given that you actually needed the fair play methodology?
Oh, Maura, that you really hit the nail on the head with what I thought would be the solution and realized wasn't. And it's the flexibility piece. For as long as I can remember, I felt like it doesn't matter how many things I have to do if I can do them on my terms and whatever time I want. If I am flexible to do these things, then everything else will work out. And so to your point with fair play, yes. So fair play pointed out that just because you can do all the things flexibly doesn't mean it's fair or sustainable to do all the things.
So were there discussions before you had children between you and Neil, your husband, about who would do what or have primary care of the children? Was there any, conversation or planning for that?
The shortest answer is no. And I might have said, well, maybe, or I swear we had to go over that a few years ago. But after really digging into how we got to where we are with two kids and imbalance in our home, I really had to stop and say, well, this is all attributed to the fact that we never talked about these things.
How did you get involved with fair play? How did you find it? Let's start there, because we really do want to delve into the experience. But how did you find it and first get started?
Sure. So it was 2019. I read the book. Eve was in Davos, speaking about the fair play book, and I got my copy then. I distinctly remember it was a holiday trip around 2019, read the book, really loved what this author had to say about putting, shining a light on the invisible labor. And I reached out to her on social media. So in the spirit of, social media marketing, I distinctly remember connecting with her through the social networks and following her content and commenting just before the pandemic. And then at some point after the pandemic hit, we connected a little further in some DMs to set up a time to talk about a project that she was working on. And fast forward, the project was the documentary.
Eve starts her book with a text she received from her husband about, "I'm surprised you didn't get the blueberries," which set her off and had her crying on the road. Did you have a blueberry moment?
I guess I'd say distinctly one particular moment, no, but there were so many parts of her story that just hit home to what I was experiencing, what millions of women experience. And it just validated that, okay, so this is a common situation. We have gotten here somehow, and this is not okay. And it's also, it is okay to think we can do better.
I'm going to stop you right there, Emily. We're going to delve into this, but let's take a break first. You're listening to The Balance Dilemma. We're speaking with Emily Hay. And Emily, this is where we really talk about fair play, using Eve Rodsky's system, and being in the documentary. For starters, what most resonated with you? Some of Eve's concepts weren't just Eve's, but we've talked about on the show lead parent. Eve talks about she-fault parent and all time being creative, equal, allocation of work and discussions. What really hit you?
I'd say one of the biggest takeaways I've had from fair play in general is that it has allowed me to release resentment that I was harboring towards my husband. And I will be candid and say I just felt like everything was personal. The lack of, she has so many concepts in the book, the lack, I don't want to say lack of involvement, but maybe the lack of ownership, right? An ownership mindset of tasks it takes to run your house. So I would look at things around the house and just resent the fact that he couldn't see them, he wasn't helping, he certainly wasn't doing them, he wasn't being proactive, and I just felt so resentful towards that. And by learning through fair play that, again, a lot of this, we're conditioned, there's societal norms, there's behaviors of men that are not celebrated, like caregiving tasks. So there's a lot of factors at play, and that allowed me to, like I said, ease the resentment and realize that he wasn't doing or not doing as a personal attack to me.
Right. But, as Eve had said, women are not naturally better at changing diapers or bathing or cooking or any of those things. There's a concept called cognitive labor. Allison Daminger, I believe, talked about there's the anticipate, the identify, decide, and monitor. And when it comes to the anticipate and monitor, that seems to fall most heavily on women, whereas the identify and decide seems to be more evenly split. Was that where your problem was?
It's funny because when you think about women not being biologically better, right, at caregiving roles, I had to really learn that and relearn that, and also not just fall into the societal pressures of, well, if someone has a full-time, in-person demanding role, if the other partner has a flexible role, then by default, he or she should handle it. In my case, it was, of course, me. So I was the she fault of everything. So I guess, the cognitive labor, if that's the quintessential part of all things invisible, my husband wasn't understanding all of that was happening in my head. And there were just so many pitfalls that Eve explains through Fair Play. She has a concept, the CPE, conception, planning, and execution of a task. And so we were constantly just missing each other's expectation because I was feeling resentful that I had done all of this planning. I'd come up with the idea, I'd planned, and then I was executing. And he was just coming in on the execution step and feeling resentful towards me because he helped. But then I looked at it and said, but you didn't help enough.
Boy, this sounds a lot like a little bit of marriage counseling. But the other thing that's coming to mind is Undercover Boss. When you see that show and you see the boss stepping in to have to do what the employees are doing, you really hit the nail on the head. If he's away at work and he is not bearing this mental load, all of the steps that are required to walk into something and handle it, then can we blame him? So it sounds like you had to do a little bit of a re-education. And
what are the interesting things, and we'll get to this, you and Neil were featured in the Fair Play documentary, and he's in there saying, I could probably do more, but sometimes it's not as efficiently done if I do it anyway. Mm-hmm. And you also said, if I don't pick it up, no one will. And that was something you actually said to your daughter, which is a lesson. We can discuss how you feel about telling her that. How did you get Neil on board to consider Fair Play and then to be involved in the documentary?
Yeah, so in the documentary, I had mentioned that I felt like if I haven't brought his attention to all of the tasks and invisible labor it takes to keep this household running, then I guess that's on me. Now, why I say I guess is because you have to communicate. I cannot expect him to read my mind. I cannot expect him to just know instantly what a full day of mine looks like when he's never witnessed it because he is physically in another building for his day job. So I do appreciate that there needs to be some communication. So that's where I said in the documentary, I need to make him more aware of these tasks. So that was one thing when he says, I guess I could do more, but his I guess I could do more would mean you just have to ask me what you need done. And then that's where I would say, you should already know. Like, you really should already understand what needs done. I don't want to have to ask. Forget it. I'll do it myself.
So how did you resolve that with him? And how should all the rest of us do it?
I mean, I would love to hear your advice for me on that as well. Honestly, this Fair Play process has brought awareness, right? That change does start with awareness. And I'm very impatient and I want change to happen quickly. And I have a high standard and I expect that we shouldn't take years to make change. But through the filming process and just, like I said, an awareness of what goes into running the household, as well as the benefits to him too. I've said through this process that Fair Play isn't set out to tell men, like, you're lazy, you're terrible, you're not doing enough, let's just bash men. No, there are huge benefits to you, to your spouse, to your family, to your children, to society if you get involved in these things as well. So I really just think that Neil wasn't aware of a lot of that. And through this process, it's become more of our daily conversation. And I don't feel that same burden that I used to when I would, air quote, ask for the help. Now I can say what needs done, and there's less of a download of why or how.
This brings up a really good point. Previously, we had talked about, different examples of successful men, and Larry King once said that if two calls came in. One was his wife and one was the studio. He was picking up the phone call from the studio. Larry King was married like 5 times. So that didn't work well for him. But looking at your husband and you on film and seeing your husband engaging with your daughters, reading to them, there seemed to be a clear benefit to him. Do you feel that the process you went through enriched their relationship or changed it in a way than how it existed before?
I'll give Neil credit that he has always had a deep connection with our kids, especially for as young as they are. I feel like a lot of dads will say, I just don't understand how to relate to babies or toddlers. Well, Neil has really been connected to them and formed a relationship right when they were little. So he's really great there. I think if anything, it opened his eyes to, it doesn't have to be, reading a book or playing a sport. It can be the small things, like let's fold the laundry together, or let's unload the dishwasher. Normalizing that dad, the male in our home, can also do those tasks really set my daughters to connect more with him too, because it's not, like I said, it's not just about like the big, I'll take them to a sporting event or I'll read a book. It can be the small things too.
What, if anything, has he taken off your list where he does it from inception through, finishing?
Yeah, so I had a business trip recently, and it's funny, I mentioned it in the Fair Play documentary. It happens to be a September trip that I take. So I was out of town for work, and there were a number of, I'll give the sports story, sports-related activities that the kids had that all I had to say was, the schedule's printed on the fridge, take it from there. So there wasn't where are their outfits? What do they need to put on to play soccer? What do they need for flag football? In fact, he's a coach of the flag football team. So that took even more, ownership on his part. So while I was away, I didn't have to worry about any of the sports-related activity. And that's something that he has definitely stepped in and taken from conceptualizing through planning and execution.
We often recognize all the work and stuff we do, but at least our husbands would say, but not what they do. Fran Hauser, who is also a guest on our show, talked about taking stock of her husband's contributions. Did you have to make an effort on that?
Showing that
what he did, recognizing what he was doing.
Fran makes a list where she makes a list of everything her husband does, and I think that helped her to be aware and not minimize.
And we'll be back. We're going to take a break. This is The Balanced Dilemma. Listening to The Balanced Dilemma, we're speaking with Emily Hay about her experience with fair play. Emily, so much of the fair play issues seem to come down to childcare. What childcare solutions do you see us needing, or that might help?
Gosh, well, there's so much of the fair play system that is hinged on communication, and one of the rituals that fair play got us into was nightly check-ins. And, it sounds so simple, but it's not easy to do.
Is that like, how was your day, or something more than that?
Sure. So it's a little more than that, only because there's not necessarily an agenda, but it's focused time that, you and your partner are simply filling each other in. What happened that day, but also what's coming up? Like, what do we have going on this weekend? What do you need tomorrow? Things that make, to your question, Maura, about childcare, things that make those needs obvious to the other partner without needing to say, like, and I need you to cover me for this. By pointing those things out and talking about them more regularly, I think childcare became less of a task that, we over processed.
It sounds like communication's a big part of the formula. I want to take a moment to tell our listeners where they can find us. This is your favorite topic, Emily, social media and the internet. We are at thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can listen to old episodes and sign up for our newsletter, find show announcements, show notes, resources, and further reading. You can follow us on social media at The Balanced Dilemma Podcast on Facebook and LinkedIn. Podcast episodes are also available for listening on Apple iTunes, Google, and Spotify. Please rate us and share us with friends. Maura, what number are you up to now on LinkedIn? Come on, tell everyone you've been working hard at this.
I've been working hard at pulling up my LinkedIn connections. I am just about at 400, and I am aiming to get to the 500.
You're going to
so
get
feel
there.
free to reach out to me, folks.
I love it, Maura. Congratulations.
Yeah, and please have your people reach out to me as well. Emily, do you think, having used Fair Play, that it's ever too late? Like maybe this would be something if you have older kids, or if one or both of you retires, that it's time to reevaluate and reallocate?
Yes. So, I mean, I do not feel like it's too late. And that question has come up organically as I find myself talking to women without children. And part of me, as I'm explaining what Fair Play is, I'm feeling like, so young one, I hope there's space for you because my ship has sailed and I just have to resign myself to this life of imbalance. No. I literally go through that in my head and I think, wait a minute, I don't want them to think that I'm telling them that I'm stuck. You are the future. Like, you have hope. So I let them know that really I have absolutely used this as a framework, as a system for shuffling the way that we look at our life and, a whole new lens.
What do you think? I had a discussion with a bunch of women, some of whom were having children get married, and I suggested that Fair Play might be a good gift, maybe for a baby shower.
Well, it's almost like a prenup or something that you discuss and arrange beforehand.
Oh, I know. I think on the back of the book it says OBGYN should be recommending folic acid and Fair Play.
Right. And really, that was an aspect of the documentary. They did have same-sex couples, which there was a benefit because it wasn't something that you just decided in the midstream. They actually talked about things beforehand, and that seemed like a benefit. So I have a question. You are in a two couple, working relationship. You both have your careers. Is it possible? Do you think that's an over expectation to have two corporate careers or two careers going at the same strength at the same time?
Without having one with flexibility?
That's a good question.
I mean, I have to say that no, that is not an unfair expectation because, again, women, men, we deserve to achieve our best. And not to sound, Pollyanna about it, it's just striving for doing the best you can in all aspects of your life. So I don't think that it's a false expectation. Is it a difficult reality? Probably.
Watching the documentary, I did not see any couples where both of them were going out to some corporate job where one of them was typically either an entrepreneur or at least had flexibility. Am I misreading something?
Gosh, well, I mean, I know Christie pointed out the same-sex couples that there was a lot to be learned about same-sex couples based on their experience of having to have difficult conversations up front. But as for how Fair Play plays with two rigid corporate employees, I personally can't speak to that, just not having that as my own dynamic.
Right. It would be tough, though, because look at the struggles your husband voiced in his job, and especially when you're in a traditional work environment. But I want to get back to something that you've talked about. You see this as work-life integration rather than balance. Can you explain that to us and what you mean by that?
Sure. As I'm on the Balance Dilemma podcast, I love talking about this because, first of all, when I heard work-life balance for the first time, it was, as a young professional working in a corporate environment and just feeling like, okay, you have rigid guardrails around your work self and then the same thing around personal. So that was they must be balanced. And if one side gets out of whack, then you need to make some different choices. What really lit me up about integration was what I talked about a little earlier in the podcast is, to me, integration was the ticket to flexibility. So I felt like, you know what, I'm one person. I'm not two separate people. I have all of these things to do, work-related, life-related, and if I mix them all together and get them done flexibly, then that really resonates with my operating system. So that's what got me fired up in the first place about work-life integration.
Now, let me ask you, also another thing that came to me in watching the documentary, there seemed to be a lot of perfectionism in what I saw in the households. And are we too tough on ourselves? Should we maybe have less stuff or reduce our expectations or tell our children that they can't do every sports team or every extracurricular they want to do? Do we create some of the problem for ourselves? That's the question I'm getting at.
Oh, I love that question. And it is such a recent concept I've been exploring, like even post Fair Play documentary, that I stop and I think, wait a minute, I'm guilty of celebrating all the things I can get done. The problem is, then I'm left, spread so thin that I'm cranky, I'm not modeling good behavior to my children, and I'm making them think that this is the expectation that they should have of themselves. So it's exactly what you mentioned about the perfectionist problem. And I'm a type A person. I consider myself a high achiever, but I wouldn't have necessarily said I need things to be perfect. But if we define this as just unreasonable expectations of the amount of things you can get done and do them well, then that's where I've really started to say, I am not setting a good example here. And the only thing I can do is change my own expectation of myself.
We've discussed this, the perils of making it look too easy and how we suffer from that. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you see that in yourself.
I do. And I see it in my profession. On social media, there's so many posts that I will see women publish that I understand what they're going at, camaraderie, you're doing great, Mom. Like, that's where their intentions are. But when they do a post that lists 10,000 things on their brain and that they have to handle before 9 a.m., I just want to cry.
Right.
And I didn't used to feel that way. I used to be like, yeah, you got this, girl. And that right there is what I've been shifting, what I celebrate, glamorize, and normalize.
So what? Yeah, we're talking over each other. We're so excited to ask you this question. But can you point to something that you see as a failure? That's something that led to change in this department for you?
I guess the failure I kept experiencing was just my unhappiness, my mental health of just feeling like I'm the classic example of I don't feel like I'm doing anything well. I'm not giving my work my full focus. I'm not giving my kids my best. And it's because there's just too many things going on. And I know you talk about, well, can you have all of the things? I mean, the Fair Play documentary really opened my eyes, right, to what women of generations prior to me. I mean, to know what are these narratives that you had to live with? Like, you can do it all, but not all at once. Or you can have it all if you pick the right partner. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
So actually, we were going to ask you that. What is your answer? Can you have it all and all at the same time?
Well, I think if anything, the whole integration piece, my latest iteration of why I'm still very fired up about work-life integration instead of balance is, yes, integration works, but you still have to be intentional with what you say yes to. So again, you don't have a limitless plate to fill. If you know you only have a few spots and you have to be very intentional of what you put on there, you can have it all, but you cannot use the same definition of it all as a woman you see on social media or as your sister or as your best friend.
When are you going to let your girls see the documentary?
Oh, it's such a good question. I don't have an answer on that yet. What do you think? They're 6 and 8. What do you think?
Well, it really addresses, imbalance and issues that you and your husband worked out. I mean, it certainly seems like you conquered that, so it's a good example. But it's not even so much an age of when. It's really what are you going to tell your girls about having children, life balance, all of these things we're discussing.
Okay. Well, maybe what I'd say, and by the way, you're kind to use the word conquer. Oh, no, we are so much in a work in progress, right? There are some days you fall off the wagon and other days you go, okay, we need to get back to our communication ritual. So it's a lifestyle, right? Most recently with my children, I have pointed out human limitations. Like, girls, mom just, I can't get that done. Or, that right now I'm busy doing this. I won't be able to do that. Or, gosh, how could we, see how dad can be involved with that? Well, before I would have just said, okay, fine, sure. Okay, yes, I'll take that. Got it. Like, I've got it. And I would have been, snippy and resentful about it all. So now I do point out human limitations. And is that a sign of being a recovering perfectionist?
Well, that's certainly a good lesson for us all. That's all the time we have. Emily, it has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, I'm so lucky.
Thank you for listening into The Balanced Dilemma. I'm Christie Derrico.
And I'm Maura Carlin.